a slave girl, a general, and a miracle. The story centers around a guy named Elisha. Well, he's the prophet in the story. I'm just giving you a little bit of intro here. And there's a series of stories about Elisha that happen in the beginning of 2 Kings. I have prepared from one of those stories, 2 Kings chapter 5. And after I'd started preparing, I just looked back and realized that this guy, Elisha, has had it's really been a big impact on my own life. I've preached before on the widow and the jars of oil. There was an Elisha story. I preached before a couple of years back as a one-off on Elisha asking for a double portion of what Elijah had. So Elisha was the successor to the prophet Elijah. And it was quite an incredible story in 2 Kings 2 that as Elijah went up to heaven, he was taken up in the chariot of fire, which is quite an amazing thing to think. And his cloak fell to the ground, and Elisha picked up that cloak, and his stories start from there. Elisha asked for a double portion of what Elijah had, and the Bible records twice as many miracles that Elisha was part of compared to Elijah. They were 2 very important Old Testament prophets. So we're going to pick up the story in 2 Kings chapter 5. As we go through it, I'll give a little bit of context and see what we can learn from this incredible story. Father, I pray that as we come to your word this morning, you would speak to our hearts. You would change our lives. All of us have come here from different points, and yet we gathered here in one place at this time, asking you to speak to each of us individually and to us as a local church. In Jesus' name, amen. So 2 Kings 5 and verse 1 says this: Now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. So if we could just leave that slide up for a sec, just to give a little bit of context. The nation of Aram is where modern-day Syria is. The Arameans were a kind of pre-runner to the Syrians, and the capital city of Aram was Damascus, exactly the same place where modern-day Damascus is today. That's maybe 150 kilometers as the crow flies north of Samaria. The nation of Israel, in other words, so if Syria was up here, the nation of Israel were direct southern neighbors, and the capital of the northern part of Israel was the city of Samaria. The guy that we read about, the general, was this man named Naaman. Now, he was, if you like, a Syrian. He was the commander of the army, the king of Damascus. Aram and Israel had been at war on and off, and that theme repeats itself throughout 2 Kings. So there was a lot of animosity between these guys, but here's this man, Naaman. We introduced him in the first 2 verses of this chapter, and it says he was a great man, he was highly regarded. God had actually given him some victories, but he had a problem that he couldn't solve. The man who commanded armies in battle and won great victories was fighting a battle that he couldn't fix, and there was a health issue. This word leprosy is a word used in the Bible to describe more than just what we would term modern-day leprosy, but covered many different kinds of skin diseases. So it would have been an obvious disease. There was some kind of disfigurement, some kind of ailment that everybody knew. This general, Naaman, had leprosy. So this is our introduction to him. Valiant soldier, brave heart kind of guy with an incurable skin disease. You got the picture of this man? It says, now bands of raiders from Aram up in the north had gone out and taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. So this is the introduction to the slave girl. She's not there by her desire. This wasn't her dream for her life. She's been taken captive in battle, and she ends up as a servant, slave, if you like, in the house of Naaman, working for Naaman's wife. This girl says she said to her mistress, Naaman's wife, if only my master would see the prophet who's in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. Naaman went to his master, now that's the king of Syria, king of Aram, if you like, and told him what the girl from Israel had said. By all means go, the king of Aram replied. I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So this is a letter from this king to a letter to that king. So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. I'd like to just pause here. I've read this story a number of times in my life, but this week I sat down just to figure out the kind of quantities and the wealth that represented. So he was taking this along as a gift to hopefully be able to buy his healing, if you like. In today's terms, the gold price this week, that amount of gold is worth about 40 million rand. There was a lot of gold. The silver was worth about 2.5 million rand, and these 10 sets of clothes, I'm sure it was royal type clothing that was also very expensive in that day and age to make. So he's not just traveling light on a single horse. There's a whole caravan of guys and gifts going along together with him, with these millions of rands worth of gift that go along as well. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, "With this letter, I'm sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy." As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes. That was a sign of frustration and mourning. And said, "Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow, the king of Syria, send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me." You're getting the picture here. This king, his general, guy that's helped carry him into victory and secured his kingdom, it's just a story from the girl that works for him. He says, "No problem. In fact, I'll send you a letter." On this side, the king of Israel is like, is he trying to start war? Because the letter says, "Here's my servant Naaman, you fix him of his leprosy," knowing that this guy commands the whole army. And so the king of Israel, it's like, well, what do you expect me to do? Thanks a lot, king of Syria. Is this just your opportunity to invade me again? When Elisha, this is verse 8, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message. "Why have you torn your robes?" In other words, why are you so upset by all of this? "Make the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Elisha lived quite close to Samaria in a little town called Dothan, and there was a lot of interaction between him and the king of Israel in 2 Kings. And he hears about this. He says, "Don't trouble, send the guy my way. We'll take care of business." So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a message to him, sent a messenger to say to him, "Go wash yourselves 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed." I'm going through this just bit by bit because I want you to get the whole picture of what happens here, because this verse triggers Naaman in not a good way. Naaman went away angry, and he said, "I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot, and cure me of my leprosy." So it appears that Elisha didn't even go to greet him, just sent a messenger. It says, "Go down to the Jordan River, which was 25 kilometers odd away, and dip down there in the Jordan Valley 7 times. And Naaman just loses it. He says to his entourage, he said, "Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed?" So he turned and went off in a rage. Has that ever happened to you? A couple of honest people nodding. Naaman's servants went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it?" So this is his entourage trying to rescue the situation. Yeah, he says, "How much more then when he tells you something simple like wash and be cleansed?" So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times as the man of God told him, and his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and he said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept the gift from your servant." Seen the size of that gift already. The prophet answered, "As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing." This is not about payment for miracles. It says it's just you keep your money, keep your gold, silver, your clothes. It was God that did that. And though Naaman urged him, he refused. "If you will not," so this is the final conversation, "if you will not," said Naaman, "please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord." So that last verse might not make that much sense to you, but for those guys, the king of Aram, they worshipped other gods. They'd built a different temple in Damascus to those gods, and that's who Naaman had always looked to as his gods. And then he comes to the God who can cure his leprosy. He sorted out. He says to Elisha, "I'm your servant." Okay, you don't want the millions of rand. Tell you what, could I take enough soil from here, put it on my 2 mules, and I'm going to erect an altar to the real God at my home. I'm going to serve God from this time forward. In other words, he has a change in his heart, a change of faith. It's a remarkable story of the slave girl, the general, and the miracle. I happened to read through the book of 2 Kings. I'm busy reading through it as part of my devotions as I'm reading at the moment. And when we were away getting some well-earned rest, this was one of the stories that I read. And when I read it, I didn't process it as, okay, there's another message. I just read it and was really inspired, pondered on it. When we got back this week, started looking to the Sunday and to the term that lay ahead, just ask God, what have you got for us? What lies ahead? We've got plans that have been laid out for City on our calendar. But you're the Lord, you're the head, you're the leader. And I woke up one morning at about 5. Just as I woke up, the story jumped into my head. And I just felt God show me some things in this story for us to take us into some of the things that he has for us. I'm so convinced in my heart that God is doing such a deep ongoing work. He's so interested in us. He loves people. He wants to clean us up. He wants to fix us up. He wants to bring us into his family, and then he wants to sort us out and deal with things in our heart and then use us to advance his kingdom and to reach other people for Christ. And so the story has a lesson, I believe, from the general, from Naaman, and from the slave girl. And I'd like to start with this great man, Naaman, who had this incurable disease. Interestingly, his name means pleasant or gracious. But he was a leper. A leper was considered unclean, disfigured, and loathsome. What's beautiful in the story is how God, even though Naaman wasn't from Israel, wasn't from those people, God's people at that time, is God was still looking out for him. He wanted to fix up Naaman's loathsomeness, his uncleanness, the disease that he carried. And such a beautiful picture in that God with all of us carry some parts of us. I'm speaking internally now. There's stuff that God's wanting to fix up. There's loathsomenesses inside of our heart. There's uncleannesses that he's wanting to cleanse and wash and sort us out. The most obvious picture of that is going from not having any relationship with him to following him. That's the starting point. But as we go along with him, he's wanting to change us and to sort our lives out. This is what he does with Naaman on the outside and the inside. It's what he wants to do with us. God's interested in changing our speech and improving our actions by working from the inside out. Now, Naaman, this great general, does one thing well in the story, and he does one thing quite poorly. The thing that he does well is he listens to the advice that the Israeli slave girl gives to his wife. He must have been a desperate man. He's had the skin disease. He's conquered all kinds of other things, but he hasn't conquered this within his health. It was incurable. And so the girl says to his wife, if Naaman went down, if my master went down to the prophet in Israel, I'm sure something would happen. And the thing that he does well is he goes. It must have been quite an expedition. This wasn't just a flight to Joburg and back, same day. He went to his king, got permission, got the letter, got this gold, silver, the mules, the horses and chariots, all these are mentioned in the story, his servants, and off they go, and it would have taken them a few days to get down into Israel. Naaman, even though he wasn't from the nation of Israel, challenges us because he was a man of action. This is what I mean by this, is he was doing something. He took action. He did something following this message that he got from the slave girl. He challenges us in this way, is that many of us with far more convenient modes of transport, with technology at our fingertips, with the much greater ability to travel distances, etc., to, if you like, get to church on the weekend, make it to life groups. With far more at our disposal, we often do far less. Many people bemoan where they're at. Oh, look at what's around me, what's happening, etc. What are we doing? What actions are we taking? It's got to be faith-based, but you see Naaman here, he did something. This is what he did well. But then we come to the thing that he did really, really poorly, is Naaman got offended. Naaman got properly offended. Everything was going well. He meets the king of Israel, and he has his first little surprise. This guy just starts tearing his robes. He's like, am I God? Are you guys trying to pick a fight? And then he gets this message from Elisha, so they pack up all their chariots, and off they go to Elisha's house. And the great general arrives at the prophet's doorstep, and the prophet doesn't even go out to greet him. Just sends a message to him. This is what you need to do to be cured. You came here to be cured. This is what you need to do to be cured. And a little switch inside of Naaman just flicks. And this thing he does really poorly. He takes massive offense at Elisha's actions. Now, Elisha hadn't insulted him and called him any names. Hadn't actually done anything wrong. He just did it differently to what Naaman expected. And it says Naaman left in a rage. He popped. He just saw red at this time. He says this, I hope you can find these verses in verse 11 there. It says, this is what he says to his servants. I thought that he would surely come out and stand and call on the name of his Lord his God and wave his hand over the spot and cure me of all my leprosy. So he turned and went off in a rage. Naaman had an expectation of what would happen in this spiritual encounter and spiritual meeting, this interaction with Elisha, and what he got was very different to that, and he just took massive offense. This also challenges me, maybe challenges you as well, because I know that there have been times in my life, many of them I could think of when I started thinking about this subject of taking offense. I could think of so many examples in my own life of moments where something had happened and I thought, and this happened, and this gap just caused me to redline, just internally. I don't know if I'm the only one in the building who's occasionally taken offense. Anybody else here? Somebody does something and it's not that they sin directly, it's just this is what you'd hoped for and this is what happened and this gap just red zoned you. And we say things like Naaman said, well, surely this, surely that, I will never, and we're about to go off in a rage, and we make decisions when we're in a rage that have got long-lasting impact. Now, I phoned Graham this week and asked him if he could help get a prop made for my illustration, because I heard somebody once say that when you take offense, it's like building a fence. So, Geordie and Mark Feelers, I can't believe it. You gave me such a lekker hug welcome. We chatted for 10 minutes before the service. Just behind that black curtain are two pieces of fencing, if you don't mind bringing them out. So I want to make an illustration today, something that I believe holds us back from experiencing what God has, is not being able to deal with the fence as well. Great, thanks so much. Please don't take offense, Mark. So we start off on this side of the fence. We don't have the fences. We charge off like Naaman does. He goes down to Samaria. He's looking for the miracle. He's looking for the change, the turnaround, the incurable to be fixed. And he has this interaction with Elisha that just doesn't go as he had planned. And in 1 minute, he goes from being here to having built a fence. And if a fence is designed to separate, it's designed to keep something out and something in. And whenever you and I take offense, we put ourselves behind a barrier, and often we build the fence with one little plank at a time. These have been made, thanks Willie for your brilliant carpentry here. This has been pre-made, but very often we carry around our planks of our personal preference, of our leanings, we expect to be treated in a certain way. It doesn't happen, and then Naaman just built the entire fence, just one shot. And he is in an absolute rage, just fuming behind the fence. Now, I see myself in this picture, because I think of moments where I didn't take offense, and those were great, but I think of other moments where I expected this, and something else happened, and I felt mistreated, I felt misunderstood, felt like this is what etc. And somewhere in my heart, it just goes from there to there. And on the inside, I build a barrier against that person, whoever I felt offended me or treated me like that. Now, what is amazing about the story of Naaman is because of, in that instance, going into rage and sitting behind his fence, he nearly went home. You're struggling to see me? Okay, that's part of the point as well. He nearly went home with a lot of gold and silver, with his leprosy, and with a huge amount of rage and wasted time. He was this close to missing out on a miracle, on a complete healing, because what he expected and what actually happened were two different things. And he picked up his fence. And you see what happens is that this is invisible, but when a person is offended, they walk around with their fence. You ever interacted with somebody who got a little offended? Listen to what the Bible says here in Proverbs 18. A brother offended is more unyielding than a strong city, and quarreling is like the bars of a castle. We had a tragic situation. I don't even know all the details. It was in my very extended family. But we have got family members, I'm speaking not in my brothers and sisters, more extended than that there are people in our family, numerous people, who walk around and do not speak to each other. Ever. No weddings, not even funerals. The tragic thing about fences is that they block us out from relationships with others. And we think we see it clearly, but we're actually working out from behind the bars of this castle, of the city. I think I made this too close. Sorry? I'm enjoying that. Being offended causes us to deny, refuse, and then distance ourselves from that which is causing us pain. People's words come, actions come, something happens just slightly off kilter, catches us, and we start to distance ourselves and self-protect because we're offended. We've picked up and built a fence. What are the things that cause offense? It's usually two things. First of all, things that cause us to build these fences are unmet expectations, as I explained with Naaman. Often those are driven through pride or insecurity. Pride and insecurity cause us to build some of these. We take offense. We build offense. We try and get away from the pain, that perceived pain. You see, Elisha he was just a little bit grumpy. A little bit unfriendly, I should say. Just didn't greet Naaman. But Naaman saw it as a personal affront. I'm this great general. I've come all this way. I'm a wealthy man. I'm a man of authority, and I have a title, and I expect people to act in a certain way. I expect people to do this and this. Do you not know who I am? And Naaman, when he isn't greeted properly by Elisha, just goes and sits here. I had an expectation. I thought you'd just come out and wave your hand and pray to your God, and you didn't do that. And he is now suddenly totally distanced from the potential miracle that sits out there. But another thing that causes us offense is unrealistic standards. We put standards on other people that they could never properly fulfill. Some of us have got standards on our friends and standards on our life groups and standards on people around us that actually are unhealthy, they're unrealistic. No person in the world could live up to them, and when they disappoint us, basically you've set the relationship up for failure, we get offended and we go back behind the fence. Offense comes at odd times, and it comes, as it does with Naaman, often comes unexpectedly. But the impact of fences that are built like this and not properly dismantled can be long-lasting and can be devastating. One of the big challenges that many Christians, many of us face is, how do we deal with disappointments that relate to God? Many of us build a fence related to a relationship with God. We trusted Him for something, we were out there, He didn't do it the way that we wanted, so we built ourselves a fence and we're just living inside here. Interestingly, when Jesus was alive, walking on the planet, He went to His hometown and He began to preach there. And the crowd, these were His neighbors that He had grown up with, they began talking to each other, and the Bible records it. It says, they say, "Isn't this the carpenter? This preacher? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us?" It's interesting, we just get a little bit of Jesus' immediate nuclear family there. But this is what it says, and they took offense at Him. Later on it says He could do very few miracles there. He could only heal a few people. The people of Nazareth arrived that day. They were just going to listen. He starts speaking quite straight and strong. And immediately they start walking around with the fence towards Jesus. They didn't recognize Him as that, but He was God. So here's my question to myself and to every one of us. How easily do you and I get offended? How regularly do we go around building fences like this? And even more pertinently, do you have fences up today against anybody? Something happened, some kind of misunderstanding. Some people are such expert fence builders, they don't just use timber and screws. It's like bars and bolts and welding and multiple layers and levels. And we do all of this in an effort to self-protect. It will never happen to me again. I'll never be treated like that again. But fences are bad news. Fences are trouble. Last year, I had a misunderstanding with, I'm going to say, a person really close to me. Not Jack's. These are quite difficult stories to tell because it's my problem, not their problem. But something happened, and in the heat of the moment, I was the Naaman. I went off in a rage. Inside. It wasn't external, it was inside. It just went pop. And I was pulling out the welding machine, the iron, the bars, busy architecturing it in my mind. But knowing actually deep down that fences are bad news. Because what happened to Naaman is that apart from the intervention of his servants that he listened to, that's what he did well as well. But he nearly ended up going all the way back to Damascus in his chariot with all his wealth, with all his titles, with all his stuff, with a huge amount of rage and with all his leprosy. And offense, building these fences, always, I want to say this carefully, building these fences always stops us moving forward with the things that God has for us. Remember at the beginning I said this story teaches us how to move forward into what God has. It's by not building these fences. So once Naaman gets past, he dismantles some of his fence. He thinks, okay, well, what's the worst that can happen? He goes down to the river. He dips 7 times. In, out, in, out, in, out. Imagine the 6th time he comes out. He's still got his leprosy. 7th time, bang, it's all cleansed. Imagine how grateful he was at that moment. And all the 25 kilometers back up to Elisha's house and all the day's journey back to Damascus. Imagine how glad he was that he didn't stick behind his fence of rage and of anger because of Elisha's greeting. I wish that I was just speaking theoretically, but I have been involved in church life from my earliest memories. And I know that we, us humans, we take offense, we build fences when people don't greet us properly. And when somebody forgets our name. Or when somebody didn't, it's not like we asked them to do something and they didn't. Well, that's one kind of offense. We expected them just to know how we were feeling and be more caring and more. We've got such high expectations often on others. But if somebody has that expectation on me, we get all defensive. No, we've got to just have grace. God wants to journey us to become less and less offendable with a thicker skin and a softer heart, being less sensitive to ourselves and more sensitive to others. That as a family and as people, we can come from behind our fences, pull them down, and move forward. There's 3 ways that I believe we need to, that help us dismantle fences. Number 1 is we take responsibility for the fence. Steph doesn't greet me like Elisha doesn't greet me. I'm just using an example. If that was to happen, and somewhere in my heart, I build a fence between myself and Steph, and I'll still shake his hand through the fence. Smile from around the fence, but in my heart, I know what I'm thinking about him. So that's not true, incidentally. I'm just using an example. We take responsibility. We say, this is my fence. That pain that I experienced with that person, this is on me, this fence. That happened, but this fence I built. This is mine. I take responsibility. It's not Steph's fence, this is Steve's fence. I choose what I get to do with it. I need to take it down. And this is often the question I find helpful to myself. What is really going on here? Okay, so you had this moment of anger, frustration, misunderstanding. What's actually happening? Why did you get that upset? I ask myself. Or Jackie asks me often as well, which I appreciate. What is really going on here? Second thing to get rid of my fences is repent. Say, God, I'm sorry for living offended. I'm sorry with living with fences. I'm holding myself back from the miracles you've got. My miracles lie on the other side of my fences, and I'm sorry for living this side of them. And thirdly, I repair where possible. Dismantle these fences, take them away. Repair relationships. Now, there's some really unhelpful ways to try and repair. There's some helpful ways. Some stuff is just on me. Well, that was my misunderstanding. Naaman doesn't need to go and have a long conversation with Elisha about his greeting etiquette. That was just on him. I've had some people come and speak to me and say stuff like this. I've just found it unhelpful. They say, Steve, could I borrow a moment? So you're sure? They say, I just wanted to let you know I forgave you. You really offended me, and I just needed to get that off my chest. And they walk away feeling a huge load's been lifted off, and I walk away, I don't even know what I did yet. That fence isn't on me. When there's some stuff that I've done that may have offended you, that is stupid, that I've got to own. But sometimes we've had a fence that's been real, we got in the trenches and we were just, it was nasty. We need to go and repair. Say sorry. Take down our fences. Fix relationships. The Bible says in Romans chapter 12, as far as it is possible, as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Some of us pride ourselves on the number of different fences we've got. We've got these palisade fences, these wooden fences. We've got that. I said to that person, if you do that, I'm never talking. I'm As if we're celebrating our fences. No, the Bible says actually the opposite is better. Live at peace with everyone without being dishonest, without being inauthentic, but live at peace. Don't carry around the building blocks for the fences. And equally, don't try and be offensive. A whole other message in that, but I want to just finish off by speaking about the slave girl. Lesson we learned from Naaman is that fences are bad news, and our miracles lie on the other side often of our fences. But there's an incredible message from the slave girl. She's a contrast to Naaman. She is carried away as a slave in battle. If anyone had the reason to build a fence, it would be her. And yet she builds a bridge. She's living as a captive in the army commander's house. He's the guy that you would want to blame, surely. And yet she's looking out for him and says, you know what you should do is you should go down to the prophet in Israel. I want to see your leprosy cured. Imagine her joy when a couple of weeks, she doesn't know about this fence thing yet, when a couple of weeks later he comes back and he says, listen, everybody here, here's the soil that I brought back from Israel. We're not worshiping any other gods. We are worshiping the God of Israel. We're worshiping Yahweh. We're worshiping the God who healed me. This slave girl who gets carried off against her will, gets to witness a double miracle. She gets to witness Naaman's skin healed, but a second, even bigger miracle, his heart changed. And instead of building fences, she built a bridge. And her story, her name is not recorded in the Bible, but her story is recorded.